Thank you so much for joining us, Martin. Truly a pleasure to have you on ET Now.
Thank you.
At the outset, let me congratulate you on being the most admired marketer of the year via our agency Reckoner report. And that is really no mean feat, given the fact that you were competing with brands across categories. But if you just look at leading telecom operators in the country, which include yourself, right? Broadly, everybody has the same service in terms of the offering, right? What do you think you're doing right? Because finally it's about connectivity and getting our data usage, but that's something that we expect from any telecom operator. So obviously you're doing something more than just the service, which is allowing the customer to look at you as an admired brand, which is something unique.
Yeah, I think it looks the same from the outset, but let me go then with the metaphor of the restaurant. The menu cards might look the same from different restaurants because they all have the same kind of dishes on the menu card. It doesn't mean that it would taste the same. It doesn't mean that the quality is the same. So if you talk about, again, starting in our business, network and coverage is extremely important. We now have 90 million customers in rural areas. Why is that? Because we've rolled out big time also in areas where a lot of operators don't go.
Right.
Where in places like Mumbai and Delhi you have a choice from maybe 8 or even more networks. If you go to the more remote places, you might at best have 2 or 3, at best. The other thing is then how do you treat the customer and how much effort and money do you put into that? And I always say that all starts with people. It might sound funny because it's a technology business, it's a service business, but in the end service business is run by people. And we have put a lot of focus in Vodafone on making sure that our staff is happy. Our staff is motivated, our staff understands what we are doing. Because in the end, if you go to a shop and there is a disgruntled employee, how will he ever give you a nice service? How will he give you a real smile? You might get the American smile, which is kind of frozen in the morning when you leave your home and it goes off when you come back. But the real smile is different, isn't it? That is when somebody enjoys what he's doing. And that is what we have been investing in a lot, which is the softer side of the company. Sure. And then on top of that, of course, as I said, you need to get your products right, and then you need to get the whole culture around that. How do you get the heart of your customer? You can get the brain of the customer by showing him the right statistics and saying, this is what my service does, you have coverage here and there. But I think if you look at our advertising over the years, because this is again something that is in the DNA of this company, this is not something that came when Vodafone came. Vodafone has explored it and improved it, but it was already there. Hutch had great advertising. If you look at the past advertising that was done, it is really advertising that goes straight to the heart of the customer. I always like if we do customer interviews, and we do them a lot, and you start talking about how's the connectivity, what do you think about the pricing, what do you think? And people are very serious, and you see them think very hard. And then you say, what do you think about the advertising? And then they start to smile. This broad smile comes on their face. Oh yeah, the puck, I love the puck. Or Zuzu's, great advertising, the Zuzu's. Suddenly you can see you go from the brain to the heart. And I think a really successful brand needs to do that. So I think our marketing journey has really developed from a relatively simple product now into far more complicated products, far more segmented offers, and then doing that in a holistic view. And holistic, I mean, we have, as I started to say, many touch points. So if a customer has a problem, he goes to a shop, or he calls a call center, or he goes to the web and does something online, he needs to get a consistent answer from the company. It can be that he gets treated differently in a shop than he would be on a call center. And that's actually a big challenge because we have 17 crores of customers. So you can imagine every month we get something like 40 million calls physically answered in the call center. We're not even talking about the ones that end up in an IVR. Getting that right with a staff turnover of probably anything between 10 and 20% at least is really a challenge. But that's what the customer expects from us. And by the way, we also know India is the place of very low tariffs. So it's not that we have a lot of money available to serve the customer, because the customer on average gives us, maybe 100 to 200 rupees,
Sure.
And of course you have high value customers that give you a lot more. So you can't really put a gold-plated customer service on top of that. It's simply impossible to pay for that. So the challenge of getting the customer happy, having the offer right, but then also doing it in a cost-effective way. Sure. I think that is the real challenge where operators are struggling with. And you can see in India you need scale for that. So the bigger operators are better at that because they have the scale. If you're smaller, that's actually a real challenge.
Marten, you talked about one of the key focuses that Vodafone does is also ensures customer retention. My question to you is, I don't think customers really change their service provider, whether they are or are not happy with them, just because this is too much effort, and it's the state of inertia that one is with their service provider. For instance, I mean, my point really being, MNP, right? And we thought that it's all going to be a game changer in terms of, disgruntled customers will just move and keep hopping in and hopping out. But it really hasn't taken off, has it?
As long as you're kind of reasonably happy with, again, the network quality, you're probably not going to shift an operator, because does it matter a lot if you pay 50 rupees more or less? For you, probably it doesn't matter. But there's a huge segment in the market. We're really talking about half of our customer base, out of the 170 million, about half of the customer base is very volatile. They will sometimes go on a monthly basis to other operators, not even to talk about the people who carry 2 SIMs. Most of the handsets these days in India sold are dual SIM handsets, meaning that they anyhow can very easily swap between the 2 SIMs, which typically are, of course, of different operators. So what we see as one of the big operators with good connectivity is that people typically use our SIM for incoming calls. But then there is an offer of typically a smaller operator, which has a very aggressive pricing scheme, and they might put in the second SIM of that operator, and they might swap that every 2 or 3 weeks, depending on the offer in the market. So our SIM is there kind of stable, but it's not being used very much because it's more used for incoming calls, because you always have the connectivity. So it's good to have the Vodafone network, as they say. It's good to have the Vodafone network, best network. But are they then using us to make the call out, where we get the money from the customer? The answer is sometimes that's difficult. So it's a very competitive market. Our colleagues in Europe don't have that problem because, there you, as you say, you need to physically change operator. Here, typically people have the 2 operators next to each other in the same handset. Now, what we, of course, need to make sure is that we also have value propositions then for these customers. And that is something that we've done also. From time to time, we just finished a campaign called... it's like you get a discount for all, everyone wins, something like that. Meaning that if you do a top-up, you get something for free. And that is for everyone. So that value perception must also be there. Because from the past, when we started 20 years ago in the metros, in Delhi and Mumbai actually, there is still a perception in the market that Vodafone is like a high-end player.
That's true.
It's a perception issue, and you can see how long perception is lasting, where actually now we have more customers in rural areas than in urban areas, not even to talk about the metros, who of course relatively have shrunken compared to the rest of the country, because there's far less people there.
If you look at simple market shares, both subscriber and revenue, so Airtel would be number 1, Vodafone number 2, Idea following number 3. When do you think you'll make it to the number 1 position when we talk about both revenue and subscriber share?
Well, what we see in the telecoms industry everywhere in the world is that there is a kind of land grab phase where market shares can easily shift. If the what we call penetration, so the number of people that have a phone is small, and the market is growing very fast, then it is relatively easier to grab more of the growth of the pie. Once the market has established, it's extremely difficult to shift market shares. You can only do it typically or over a very long period with very small shifts, which actually we have done the last few years, because the last 5 years, every year we grew about 0.5% market share. So we're now at just over 22%. We started when I came in at 17 something. So we did a bit more than 0.5% per year, which you can kind of gradually do. If you want to say, now I want to go from 22 to 30, where Bharti is, that would mean probably years of intense price fighting. So you bring down the whole market, and nobody's interested in that. Why would you want to do that? I always say we're in the business not in the end for market share, but in the end to make money for our shareholders. And believe me, that in itself is a huge challenge in the telecoms industry in India, as you know. Why would you want to destroy an industry by having a kind of focus on, I need to be number one. So being number one for me is not relevant. What we need to be is a good operator for our customers, a good company for the customer, and then make money for the shareholder.
Sure.
And if I can do that with 22% market share, then that's absolutely fine. There is no law that says you need to have 30%. What we see in telecom, and this is what I keep saying all the time, is that actually in all the markets in the world, typically only 3 operators make money.
Yeah.
All the rest is losing money. And actually you see the same thing here. If you look at the numbers of the operators,
Airtel, you
Airtel,
and
us, and Idea, and then the rest is already starting to really be difficult, if not a disaster.
Sure.
So where in other countries you typically see maximum 4 operators, sometimes 5, there will be 2 struggling. Here the problem is we have 9. So there's 3 guys who in the end have scale, because it's not about that we are so much smarter, it's not that we are so much better, it is because we have been able to build the scale. If you cannot build that scale, then you're in trouble. We have over 120,000 sites. A site, a tower,
sure,
is costing us fixed costs over 50,000 rupees per month.
Right.
So the moment that you have to build this infrastructure, when you don't get the revenues, you're in serious trouble. And actually, if you analyze what's happened in the market the last 2 years, you see that the top 3 operators have taken about anything
70%?
between, it's actually more, 80 to 90%. Last year it was 90%, this year it's come down a bit to 80%. Of the growth of the market, because customers are moving there where the best networks are. And yes, there might be a little bit of a price difference, but that doesn't mean it's a value difference. Maybe you get more value for your buck with the bigger operator. Yeah. So for the smaller operators, building scale is very difficult. And again, you can maybe do it when you're in the land grab phase. We're already over that in India. The good thing is that we have the scale now in Vodafone that we can serve our customers with the products that we have developed very well. We are profitable, and I think we have a lot of investment every year available for, of course it starts with new spectrum. The government will have a spectrum auction in February again, but then based on that technology now, and that is something where we also see that the world is changing very fast. Where in the past, once you build a voice network, scaling it up a bit for more volume is not very expensive. Data is different. Now we see internet is exploding. 3G is doing very well. There is this perception in the market that 3G is not doing well in India. It's not true. 3G is doing very, very well.
In the sense it's driving internet usage.
Yeah, but also in terms of volumes. If you see how quickly, after 3 years more or less, we have 3 years 3G in the market now. You see how quickly we have driven volumes. Already our 3G volume is 40% of our 2G volume. Already our 3G users, for example, Vodafone, India, the highest usage of data in the world for Vodafone of all the 30 countries that they're in is already in India. And if you realize that we only have 3G in half the country, because the rest is actually, we don't have the spectrum. So there is a tremendous opportunity here in data. But the problem there is that it comes with a lot of additional investment. The moment the data usage goes up, you need to invest more. Right. The capacity is more or less 1-to-1 to the usage. And that means that there is a huge demand on financial resources in the operators. And there you see another problem in our industry. The financials in India are not that great because the government is taking a lot of our money in terms of sharing the revenues, all kind of fees. Spectrum is very expensive. So I think what we need to do in India to get more broadband and more internet usage, where this government, as you know, has put an agenda of digital India and wants to build smart cities and so on. That's all based on connectivity in the end, and that needs a lot of money, meaning that the focus in the government should shift from seeing this industry as a milking cow to really one of the big contributors to development. And that is, I think, what we did the last 10 years. We have really developed India because of the mobile telephony.
So you think the new government has got this plot that they're actually contributors and not an industry that needs to be milked?
I think the government realizes it, and it says the right things already for a few years. The problem is they also need money. So it's very difficult, more or less, what the one hand says, what the other hand does. But I think you need to get out of this dilemma. And if we're serious about building broadband in India, that will all be about, as we call it, the last mile. Sure. You can build fiber networks, it's relatively easy. But then, getting the connection to the customer, the last mile, in India, that's going to be a mobile play. Believe me, it's not going to be fixed. Everyone knows that. There are very few fixed lines in India. Nobody's going to build more fixed lines on that scale. So it needs to be mobile. That means that the private players will have to take the majority of that burden, because that's what's happened in the last years also. That means that we need financial room to be able to make those huge investments. We, as Vodafone alone, have in the last few years invested anything between 4,000 and 6,000 crores every year. But if you look at the total, it is really not enough. I've made this comparison more often, and people don't like it, but I still do it. In India, last year, invested $5 billion into telecoms networks. China did 10 times that much, 50 billion. And that's not for 1 year, that's year after year. It simply means that we are under-investing in India. That's why the broadband penetration is so low. So we need more investment in India. You can only get that if you drive more financial healthy industry. And that's today a problem. There are too many players who don't have money.
But does the investment justify the returns in India, given the fact that we're such a price-sensitive market and we're so value-driven more than any other market in the world? Does it justify it?
The problem, in my view, is not the fact that it is value-driven, because, yes, that is true, but I think many markets, if you look at Indonesia or Brazil, or they have the same kind of dynamics. The problem here is that the industry structure, as I call it, has been set up wrongly. Too many players got spectrum, and they didn't always get it in the right way. As you know, things are still in court. Meaning we ended up dividing very valuable resources to too many players who underutilize them. And that means that the bigger guys who really need that resource don't have access to it, or have access to it, but it's very, very expensive. Sure. If you saw what we had to pay to get our spectrum back in Mumbai and Delhi and Kolkata this year, that was an enormous amount of money. 21,000 crores we paid for that spectrum. That means that, there's no such a thing as free lunch, as Ronald Reagan used to say. So if I give 21,000 crores to the government for my spectrum, I can't use it for building networks, is it? You can only spend it once. So meaning that there is a disproportional part of the cash flows of this industry go to the government and not enough back in the networks. I'm not even talking about the shareholders, because again, shareholders in Vodafone haven't got nothing in 8 years. So shareholders have been very patient. That's not the issue. The issue is between the government and the network investments. And that needs to change if we want to drive internet, if we want to drive digital India. That needs to change.
I want to talk to you about the fact, about what you mentioned just a minute ago, where you said that, we're broadly a saturated market in terms of sheer penetration, right? Given that, your challenge to actually grow the business would be to actually drive consumption per user, right? Yeah. And that's tough, given the fact that, most of this market is prepaid. How are you really addressing that issue?
Well, there is a kind of natural limit on some forms of consumption. We see that, for example, in voice. We see elasticity in pricing for voice minutes. Very clear. If you make them more expensive, people start to use it less. Or they switch your usage to another operator. That's what we see. And we're back to the dual SIM handset and so on. In data, that's different. So our opportunity today is really data. Okay. Data is something where you can see that once people get comfortable with using the internet, and they get comfortable with using certain applications on the internet, be it Google search, be it even some forms of messaging services, I can see it myself. I'm using these apps also, where 2 years ago on WhatsApp, I would say 99% of what's going over WhatsApp was pure text, which is very data light, of course, on an application. So for us, it doesn't do much. Actually, it was bad news, because it took away our SMS and it goes to WhatsApp. Now what you see about a year ago, probably 50% of what goes over WhatsApp in my phone is photos. That, of course, already taking a lot more data. What I now see today is that probably 25% of what comes in over Facebook and WhatsApp is actually videos. Suddenly you can see that the data usage shot up. So I think we are in that journey as an industry where you will see a lot of the world moving to video. And that is, I think, what you see. If you open media these days, typically 5 years ago it would be a long read article. Now after 5 lines you have a video, isn't it? Sure. And you click on the video, because that's actually a much more efficient way of communicating. And that is the future of our industry, making sure that once you open your video, it streams well. Right. It doesn't buffer, And once you get used to that, it's a bit addictive, isn't it?
But what is the star right now in terms of, where most revenue contribution is coming in?
It's still voice, very
it's still
clearly.
voice.
85% of our revenues is still voice. About 12-13% is now pure data, pure internet browsing, and the rest is a bit in between, a bit of SMS, a bit of VAS, traditional VAS.
And this whole paradigm shift you talked about, where, data will be your future superstar, how long do you think it will take?
That will be probably another 5 years before it becomes
50-50?
Seriously relevant, meaning that the 13% has to move to 2025. But again, that's also very much depending on, do we get spectrum?
Of course.
If I don't have spectrum in half the country, how can I drive the data service? So
right.
If the government gives the spectrum and we build a network, then I can drive it much harder. So it's not only what the customer wants, it's also, of course, what is available in terms of resources.
Right. In terms of just telecom as an industry, where, you all are three big players, but the fact is because of, some things going wrong in Ori, telecom really has, it's got a bad name. How do you think this whole, do you think the Cleanup Act has begun? And do you see some changes happening, or do you think it's just...
Yeah, it is happening clearly. We were already referring to the fact that actually de facto, as I call it, consolidation has happened because the majority of the new revenues in the industry go only to a few players. The government, I think, can facilitate the cleanup of the market by allowing a few things, which we have been discussing for some time, which is a better M&A policy, which is spectrum trading and spectrum sharing. Now, the sad thing is that even if you come to the last two, where TREA has already given recommendations, for example, on spectrum trading, it's sitting in the ministry and nothing is happening. So I think the government should be more serious about facilitating that process. That stops capital destruction, because a lot of capital has been destroyed in this industry. You don't need 12 networks in Mumbai. Nobody needs 12 networks. 3 or 4 is more than enough to drive competition. So all the rest is capital destruction.
Right.
And we should have used that money to build out in rural areas and not to build the so manyest network in a place where already there is good connectivity.
Sure. Marten, what is your vision for Vodafone, the next 5 years in India? What would you like the company to see achieve?
I think we need a better profitability. That's probably the main thing, and that will then drive further investments. We will have to be far over 200 million customers. We're now at 170. We will easily go in the next few years over 200 million customers. So the customer base is not the problem. We have a tremendous good customer base. The problem is that it's difficult to make money on it, which comes back to things like industry structure, sharing of money with the government, taxes, all those things. And I think actually, and that's my honest opinion, this is not only about our shareholders, because I said our shareholders have been quite patient. But actually India is holding itself back as a country by not developing its data infrastructure, its broadband infrastructure. And I think that the current Prime Minister understands that very well. That's why he drives this digital agenda. So we just need to find a new equilibrium between investment and return on that investment. And that has not been very good for our industry in the last, let's say, 10 years. It's actually been pretty bad. We had a few good years and then the whole thing collapsed when these 6 new licenses came in. And we're kind of gradually recovering from that. Some of the players are gradually recovering from that. The rest is probably still in difficulty. So I think you need to get this industry structure right. Then shareholders will be more than happy to put more money in, because it's a very long-term play. Shareholders know that. This is not a short-term play. So they're willing to wait for returns. But there needs to be some light at the end of the tunnel, let's put it that way.
Do you think Reliance is going to change the game?
Reliance is investing a lot of money. I guess you're talking about Jio.
Yep.
So we take them very serious, and I think it will be a game changer in terms of another new entrant into the market. At the same time, we've seen so many new entrants coming into the market in the last few years, and none of them has been very sustainable. The difference is, I think, that Jio clearly has far more access to money than probably most of the other players had. So from that perspective, we will take them very serious. But as I said, it is not a technology play. It is in the end a service play. And it's not easy, believe me, in a more or less established market to fight you in as a new player. So that is the situation. We will see how it goes.
Thank you so much, Marten. Truly a pleasure, and many congratulations once again.